So we now know it. Brett Kavanaugh is an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Now, just his presence on the court, it will alter the way the court works and the decisions that it comes to, but it probably won't tamp down the real concerns that have come with his contested confirmation. As jurists, editorial pages, and regular Americans worry about his and now the court's impartiality. They're worried about a court that appears just as partisan as the rest of D.C., that especially after Kavanaugh attacked Democrats and the Clintons during his confirmation. Now, that group, it includes a rare criticism of Kavanaugh from a retired Supreme Court justice, and I should mention a lifelong Republican, John Paul Stevens.
I think that his performance during the hearings caused me to change my mind. He has demonstrated a potential bias involving enough potential litigants before the court that he would not be able to perform his full responsibilities.
So how will the court navigate this moment when so many are questioning the legitimacy of the court itself? And what are the big cases Kavanaugh will soon have a huge say in? And for more, let's bring on our guest, David Rudenstein. He's constitutional law professor at Cardozo School of Law, where he's taught constitutional law since 1979. He was also dean of that law school from 2001 to 2009. David, thank you for the time.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know, I'm curious, like all of us, when you watch the confirmation hearings, did you come to the same conclusion that Justice Stevens did, where he said the temperament, even though he thought that he had the legal bona fides and the qualifications, but the temperament would do two things. One, it would be have to recuse himself from many cases, talking of Kavanaugh, but also it was the wrong temperament for a justice. Did you feel the same thing when you were watching the hearings?
I did indeed. The temperament issue is one thing, and you know, of course, Judge Kavanaugh had many years on the D.C. Circuit Court where his temperament was not in question. But during the testimony, what he did was to set forth a critique of the political opposition to his nomination. And he did so in terms and ways which suggested a real hostility towards what you might consider to be the Democratic Party platform. And he accused the Democratic Party of engaging in a conspiracy to destroy him, his family, and undermine his nomination. And after that speech was over, one would have to wonder how he could possibly sit with an open and fair mind on cases that are going to necessarily come to him, which have a strong political stripe. So immigration cases, climate cases, environmental cases, gay rights, abortion. So look, if you were a party or a lawyer in a case like that and you were before the court and you lost, you have to wonder whether or not the cake was baked before you actually argued and whether or not the judge's mind was so closed that he couldn't possibly treat you fairly.
Chief Justice Roberts is an interesting spot here, and even if he tries to keep some of the incendiary cases off the docket for a while, you can't do it for too long. It's been said, and this is just reading tea leaves, that he views this third branch, the judiciary branch specifically, as the High Court. He doesn't want to see it as yet one more political arm along with Congress and the executive branch. Can he do it? Does his role change? Do you think he becomes a quasi-Kennedy, similar to, I guess, the role he adopted during the ACA when it before the High Court? What do you see Roberts doing here?
Yes, well, he's the wild card in the conservative bloc of 5 right now. I don't see any of the others moving very much. But he has indicated by past opinions and votes that he has the potentiality for some flexibility here, and you might assign it to a sense of pragmatism, the need to keep the legitimacy of the court protected. I think there's evidence that Chief Justice Rehnquist did the same thing after he became the chief in the 80s, and if you track his opinions in the late 80s and 90s, you can see some surprises there compared to his earlier writings. And I think there's hope on behalf of many that Chief Justice Roberts might chart the same kind of course.
You know, obviously, David, I know polls don't matter at this point when it comes to the High Court, especially given the confirmation, but both the feelings as it relates to Kavanaugh and either on any of a host of issues. Take Roe, for example. More than 60% of the country wants a woman's right to choose to be preserved in some manner. They can disagree on a host of some of the, late term, et cetera. But on the broader issue as to whether or not a woman should have a right to choose, more than 3 in 5 Americans say she should. Where are we right now? We're a minority in terms of, if you believe the politics that put them on the court, represent the majority of the public, and they don't share necessarily on social issues, at least, a common view.
Well, I think that's a very good point that you're making, and in fact, it has much broader implications. Right now, of course, we're a governing system which is democratic in its values, but we are ruled for the moment by a minority of the American population as a whole. The president lost the election by 3 million votes. The Senate is tilted towards the Republican Party, and the states that are represented in the Senate by the Republicans have a minority of the national population. Although each district in the House of Representatives is supposed to have roughly the same population, through gerrymandering and voter suppression, the Republican Party has managed to make the Democratic majority, in fact, a minority in the House. And now we have a Supreme Court where 4 of the 9 justices have been nominated by presidents who lost the popular vote. President Bush lost the popular vote in 2000 and put 2 members on the court, and now President Trump lost the popular vote, and he put 2 members on the court, and they were confirmed by senators that represent a minority of the population. So it's very ironic that a governing system which prizes democratic values has been so distorted that a minority of the national population runs, in fact, all 3 branches of government.
And that brings me to my final question. Are you concerned that whatever the public has felt, and obviously Bush v. Gore, there was certainly inflamed passions after that ruling, but nonetheless, the public generally believed the Supreme Court fairly called balls and strikes. Are you worried that we're at a window right now where if we're not careful, it'll just be viewed in the same prison as Congress or the White House is? It's just another political extension?
We're in a very bad situation, and you can see that to some extent just by the mere votes that were cast to confirm Justice Kavanaugh. He won 50 to 48. You compare that to justices on the court who were nominated by Republican presidents and who were Republicans in the 70s and in early 80s. They had vote margins of over 90. In some cases, it would be 90 to 1 or 95 to 3 or something like that. Overwhelming support. And so those margins indicate the kind of the politicalization of the court, and that's what's causing all of this fear. I actually don't know how we quite get out of it, but we need to get out of this and to restore the kind of balance that we've had in the past, and that will reassure the American public that the court is above politics, and using your terms and Justice Roberts' terms, calling balls and strikes and not simply making decisions by political preferences that are hidden inside of legal doctrine.
Well, I think we're going to find out soon enough. Professor Rudenstein, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Up next this season on the line for the Yanks against the Red Sox in a pivotal Game 4 after a horrific evening last night here. We'll take you to the stadium for a preview straight ahead.